This initial section actually took me about 15 minutes. I am quite slow at times, so I sped it up quite a lot because you can't really see it very well. But I just am marking out the different points of the face. I mostly do this by eye, really, comparing it to like the reference picture and looking like where things go in relation to others. And there's a lot of different techniques you can do for this. So some artists will do grids, some artists will just map out different points, some will draw sort of freehand like I've done here. Tracing's also okay, really, I think, and because you still don't end up with a finished illustration at the end. So yeah, you can just see me sort of freehand adding in a few details that I've decided to do. And I just went with what I felt on this one, with adding the little stars. I just wanted to go with something a little bit sort of mystical, maybe. And I think it was a little bit later on in the process I decided to make this a little bit more obvious of the direction. And I'd been thinking about believing in myself and like what I want to achieve for the future. So that was kind of a little bit where I was going with the look and feel of it. And I had a necklace in that says believe as well. You can just see me here starting to pull out where I've done like the really light line work. I'm just darkening a little bit, and I tend to work across the drawing, like you can see. I do often emphasize the right hand side, weirdly. I prefer drawing on that side, but it's important to just check that everything is looking balanced. So you see me just moving about through the drawing, and I really like this way of working. I'm using a mix of pencils. I have this mechanical pencil that's really great for detailing, and then I tend to use a 2B graphite pencil, and that can just be a little bit softer for shading, which I think I'm using there. And then I also sometimes use a 2H one, so that is a lot lighter, it's a harder pencil. And if I don't want as intense sort of detail, but just still to make some markings on the paper, that can be really good. And it can be good for just that initial sketch as well, just to get a light drawing down. You will also see me using a little paintbrush sometimes. And this is something I've only really started doing relatively recently. It just helps blend and soften the lines. I think I saw one or two other artists or illustrators doing it. Whereas before I've used like a blending stub or cotton buds, and they're great as well, and I'd definitely say experiment with it. I find that the paintbrush is a really gentle way of doing it, where with the blending stub it's a bit more heavy-handed, and you have to be really careful not to just make it look a smudgy mess. Cotton buds quite nice as well, but obviously they do wear down a lot quicker, and I guess partly I'm thinking like environmentally and stuff. I don't love like if I was continually using them, but just so you can play around with it. Actually, another really cool thing you can even do is just a bit of tissue. I've done that in the past, thinking about it, especially for larger areas. It's less precise, but a tissue can help blend out those like markings. But I do like to keep some of that in there anyway. I like it to look like a drawing. I'm not aiming for hyper realistic. I think that looks nice when you can see the pencil marks and the artist's markings basically. You can just see me gradually adding in little bits of detail, shading, the lines on the face. Again, I do like a little bit of realism, so I think it's important to add in the little lines people get under their eyes. I love adding things like freckles in. You're seeing me sometimes touching up with a little kneaded or putty eraser, and that's really good because you can smush it into a little point and then just erase the little section where you've made a mistake, like I just did there. Lips, I think I do these sometimes a mix of ways. Sometimes I draw more hard sort of defined lines and it's much more illustrative, and other times I tend to go more of a softer shaded lip approach, which this one has a little bit more. A lot of that has just come from practice really, and it's so good to do little studies, lots of drawing basically, but You can just isolate certain elements, like a previous video I did was of the noses, and I highly recommend for doing things like that for lips and eyes too. You can really start to develop your skills. When I add hair in, it's something that I think I might still work on. Sometimes I'm really happy with how my hair's come out, and other times not so much. But it's helpful to block sort of the sections, as you can see, because quite often you may not notice it as much in real life, but especially in photos, it helps bring out where there's sort of like chunks of sections of hair, so flowing one way or the other. And it makes it look more natural as well, to not just have it all like perfectly like in a dead straight line, or it's just more natural if it's got things like waves to follow those, and they really do sort of fall in sections usually. You can see at this point I've still not got really sort of harshly defined shadows. I'm still just gradually like building up little bit by bit. It's quite evenly it's quite evenly developed at this stage, although like I said, I do tend to slightly favour the right side. And this is where I'm adding in the necklace detail that I mentioned at the start. It's something I've started to do more and more, is adding a word or two here and there into my illustration, just to kind of help bring out what I'm trying to evoke in it. I quite like doing that via sort of accessories basically, especially because I mostly focus on portraiture, and so things that can help tell a story or mood are the clothes that the person's wearing, whether they have makeup on and how that makeup is, their jewellery, do they have any tattoos, do they have any piercings, things like what their hair colour is. It says, you know, something about a person, and it's bringing all of those elements together to convey something. Now, eyelashes are another thing that it's very important to be closely observing to ensure you're creating a natural effect, and that they are following the curves that the eyelashes naturally do. It's not just sort of spindly, drawn on lines. Okay, now here you see me using a little piece of paper under my hand, and that's working with certain materials, so like pencil does it a little, especially if you're using anything like charcoal or graphite powder, you're going to get so many smudges, so a little piece of paper under your hand really helps eliminate that. Sometimes you'll see me pushing it in and out of the way, because I do find it a little bit annoying at times, but because it kind of stops your hand flowing as well, but it does protect everything from just becoming smudged, so yeah. With the eyebrows is another one to watch, the direction of how those little hairs are sitting. And I think I guess I've probably found a bit of a shorthand of how I like to draw eyebrows, but you know, not everyone's goes the same way. Some people have more sort of loose strands, others will be more sort of perfected. I find there's certain areas that I like to shade more than others, so I don't like to put too much shading kind of around the top lip or anything like that. I just think it might look a little weird. I quite like putting a lot of shading around the eyes and detail there, and obviously into the hair as well. Now with this I've built up just lots of little pencil strokes, as you'll see. I tend to emphasise the root and a little bit the base of the hair as well as picking out any shadows that naturally fall within the hair. So obviously quite often you'll see the underparts of the hair. Just like that sounds weird, doesn't it? But the underneath sections will be a lot darker. It's where the shadow will naturally fall, and so it looks more natural to have darker sections there, and then it will be lighter probably as you go out. If there's a wave to the hair, there usually is a light highlight on where the hair will curve up, and then as it curves in, that will tend to be darker, so you can watch out for that as well. And if you like the more realistic look, then that's something you can add in. A little tip as well, and it's something I've started to do more recently, is adding little flyaway hairs in. I think it looks more natural, so often people will have sort of around their face a few strands of hair, and then also at the edge of their hair. It sounds really weird, but you know, towards the outside we'll have the odd sort of flyaway strands. I will say for me actually I'm working on a sort of slightly lightly textured paper here because I wanted to add watercolour, and also this paper was really a really nice what is it called, hot pressed, I think. I'll double check that paper, so it is smoother than a lot of watercolours, but it can hold a lot of water and pigment. However, I personally much prefer drawing hair on a smooth Bristol board paper. I think it, for me, gives a nicer quality, and there's a little sections of this that just aren't sort of smooth in how I'd like it in the hair, because I think it's partly because of the paper, and maybe I'm less experienced with drawing hair onto this type of paper as well. I think if you are when you are starting out, definitely experiment with different types of paper and find what works for you. It's not a one size fits all. It depends on your medium. So you know, if you are using watercolour, you're going to need a watercolour paper most of the time. Something like a Bristol board's a lot flatter, and you can add really light washes of watercolour, but any more than that and it will start to warp the paper, and actually sometimes pull, you know, it pulls like little bits of the paper up, so you can't load it with water at all. But yeah, you'll start to find the qualities that you do and don't like in the materials that you're working with. I think, like I've said, I often work with pencil. It's something I'm really comfortable working with, and I do like adding little light washes of watercolour, although admittedly I'm not super experienced within that medium as well. And for me it's just adding more little details, and it's not the main focus. So it's just finding what you like and what works for you and the effects that you want to achieve. I'm actually decided to add a little silver highlight to the necklace, but I went in a bit heavy-handed initially for the little loop that attaches it, so I wasn't that pleased with that bit. It's a blob of sort of dark silver. And then for the necklace itself, I blended a little bit of the watercolour with the actual metallic ink, and I thought it achieved a lot nicer result. Okay, so that is the process of the drawing. The next step for me will be to scan it and edit it. And one thing I really like, sort of more, I feel, more I am an illustrator, is that it's not frowned upon to scan it in and adjust it and actually improve the work a lot more in the digital process. Whereas I think more for fine art or artists, obviously there is digital artists, I'm not saying that, but there is more of an expectation that you would only do minor adjustments in your scan. But I feel no shame in going in and seeing if I can improve it. So I'll see what I can do with that, and I might put in a little update video as well for that later on. Alright, thank you for watching. Goodbye.